In today's video, we're going to be creating a code GUI with some codes for our Roblox game. If you've played any Roblox game before, then you probably have seen a code GUI. This is simply a code GUI with a text box inside of it where you type in a simple code and it will give you rewards based on if that code is redeemable or not. So to start off, let's just go right over here to Starter GUI, and we need to create our GUI for our codes. So let's click on the plus icon after hovering over Starter GUI, and this will allow us to add something inside of it. The thing that we're going to be adding inside of it is called a Screen GUI. We're going to click on Screen GUI right here. We can rename this to Codes GUI, just like this, because it is our graphical user interface for our codes. That's what GUI or GUI stands for. After that, let's click on the plus icon for our Codes GUI right here, and click on frame. This is going to be the main frame here. And what we want to do is let's go ahead and go into the properties this time. We want to change the anchor point down to 0.5, 0.5. Now this may offset your frame in a weird position at first, but that's okay because we're going to put a counter position in there that's going to straighten everything out and position our GUI frame right in the center. So we're going to change the position down to 0.5, 0, and then 0.5, 0. And this is going to position our frame right in the center of our screen. After that, we need to mess around with the size of our frame. For me, I'm going to change the size down to 0.3, and then 0 followed by a comma, and then we're going to do 0.15, 0. I may go up to 0.2 on the y-axis instead, just for a little bit more of a size, you could say. And from there, I'm just going to hold shift and drag one of these corners, and that will simply make our codes GUI a little bit bigger. After repositioning it into the middle, you may need to go back and reset the position, but we are good to go. After that, inside of our frame, which I'm going to rename to holder, by the way, because it's going to be holding everything else for our GUI here, I'm going to add in a few different things just to simply customize our holder frame. The first thing is going to be a UI stroke. And what this is going to do is going to put a little outline around our frame here. I'm going to change the thickness of this UI stroke to 4, and the color is going to remain where it is. After that, I'm going to add a UI corner to my holder frame right here, and I'm going to change the corner radius to 0.1, 0. I may actually go for much more of a square look, so I'm going to go for 0.05 instead. And that looks much better to me. Anyways, that's all that we need to do for our holder frame, so we can actually go ahead and duplicate our holder frame by pressing Ctrl and D, and then we can drag and drop this new holder frame into our other holder frame right here, and now we have this little frame inside of our other frame. I'm going to rename this one to box frame because it looks like a little box inside of our holder here. I'm going to adjust the size to about 0.5 and 0.3. I may actually go up to 0.6 on the x-axis, and that is looking much better. This is going to be where our codes text is, so we want to make sure that there's enough room for it. After that, inside of our box frame, let's go ahead and click on the plus icon and insert a text box. If you don't know what a text box is, you can simply click on it right here and it'll allow you to change the text of this button right here. And that's perfect because we want to make sure that the player will be able to type in their own codes. Like you can type hello here if you'd like to. Any word, any letter, anything that you want to type here, you can feel free to do so. After that, we want to change the anchor point to the same 0.5, 0.5 as before. And the position to once again 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0. This is going to position our text box in the very center of our box frame, and then the size of this I'm going to resize down to about 0.8, 0, and then 0.6, 0. This will give it kind of an elongated, sleek sort of look, which I'm going for, so I'm going to keep that. I'm also going to change the background transparency up to 1, simply so you don't have to deal with that. And then for the font and the text settings down here, I'm personally a big fan of the Fredoka 1 font, so I'm going to choose Fredoka 1. I'm also going to go down and choose text scaled as the Boolean value right here. That will simply make it so our text is much bigger. And the text right now, we can just set this to nothing. And the placeholder text, we want to set something, I guess, explanatory for our players here. So I'm just going to put full caps and it'll be enter codes here. Now, in order to see our placeholder text, what we need to do is just get rid of the space that we have inside of our text property right here. And this will just display the placeholder text. You can see this is saying enter codes here. Now, after that, we want to go ahead and have a button that we can just press enter right here. That way we can enter our codes. So I'm going to close off our box frame for now because we no longer need it for the time being. I'm going to click on the holder and then insert a text button. This button I'm going to drag right down here. Actually, we're going to change the position and everything, so it doesn't really matter. The anchor point we're going to set to the same 0.5, 0.5. We're also going to do the same 0.5, comma 0, comma 0.5, comma 0 for the position, but I'm going to change the y-axis to something like 7 or even 8, and let's try 8.5. Just to make sure we get it right in the center here. May even do 8.4. And let's try 8.3. It really is trial and error just to make sure that everything looks good. I'm going to copy these same UI stroke and UI corner from up here by pressing Ctrl and D, and that'll duplicate them, and then we can simply drag them into our new text button. After that, we click on the UI stroke and change the apply stroke mode property to border instead of contextual. And then for the text button, we can change the background color to a green color, and we can go ahead and replace the text inside of here with nothing because we don't want any text to be there, simply because we're going to add in a text label instead. And the size of this text label is going to be 1, 0, 1, 0, and the anchor point is going to be 0.5, 0.5, and the position is 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0. We can set the background transparency to 1, so that way our green color comes back out. And then once again, it's simply a matter of changing the font to Fredoka 1 and putting on text scaled right here. And then we can just change this text to enter. And now I'm looking at it, I may change the size down to 0.8, 0, 0.8, 0, just so it's a little smaller for the text. And then I also want to change the text color 3 to white. And then I'm going to copy this UI stroke, put it inside the text label, and change the apply stroke mode from border back to contextual. That way the stroke is around our text. Now, this doesn't really matter at all. It's simply a matter of preference here, but the top of our GUI right here is looking incredibly empty. So inside of our holder right here, I'm going to click on the plus icon and insert a text label. There we go. This looks much better in my opinion. Now the only thing that we have left to do is simply create an exit button so that way the player can get out of our code GUI. So let's click on this text button right here. Let's copy it and move it up to the top right corner, which actually we can do with our position here. I'm going to do 0.9, 0, 0.1, 0, and then we simply have to resize it. So for this is looking like a pretty good size, and we can simply just reposition it back up here. It doesn't really have to be perfect. I'm going to change the text from enter to an X right here, and then we can once again just change the background color of the button itself to a red. After that, I'm going to rename this text button to exit, and the other text button we can rename to enter. And I'm also just going to drag this exit button a little bit inwards. There we go. So that's everything that we need for our codes GUI here. After that, let's just click on our codes GUI right up here. And let's click on the plus icon and add in a local script. So first off, let's start up here with some services. I'm just going to declare a comment up here to keep our code nice and organized. I'm going to start off getting the player's service, and this is going to be equal to game : get service, parentheses, quotation marks, players. This player's service is simply this player's service that you see inside of the Explorer. It's responsible for holding all the different players inside of our game, which is you, me, and anybody else that plays. After that, we're going to need to get our replicated storage service, which is this service right here inside of the Explorer. We typically use this as a storage location for a lot of different things, such as folders, values, events, functions, stuff of that sort. And this variable is going to be equal to game get service replicated storage. And now inside of replicated storage, let's click on the plus icon to the right of that and insert a remote function. Now I talked a little bit about remote events in this one scripting tutorial, which you can watch up here in the top right, but I would recommend finishing this tutorial first, but then you can go and watch that video for a much deeper understanding. A remote event is a way for a script to communicate to another script in a game, but a remote function is sort of similar to that, as it will fire over to the server and then it will go back to the client, or it will start at the server, fire to the client, and then go back to the server. So it kind of makes a circle rather than just going straight to one destination. And I'll kind of show you how it works a little bit later. But for now, we can rename this remote function to submit code, and then back to our script. Let's go down a line, and I'm going to create another comment just for our variables right here. Once again, just keeping everything nice and organized. I'm going to say local submit code will be equal to replicated storage.submit code. And then we have our GUI variables right here. We're going to get our UI or our GUI, whatever you would like to call it. This is simply going to be equal to script.parent. Then our local holder will be equal to GUI.holder, because that is our holder frame right here. While we're at it, let's also get our enter button, which will be equal to holder.enter. And our exit button, which will be equal to holder.exit. And then let's go down and create another comment for our functions here. And first off, let's just start off by saying exit.mouse button one click connect function with parentheses like this. And now we're just going to simply say holder.visible will be equal to false. If we click play right now, you'll see it inside of our game. If we click on this X button, it's going to X off of our GUI right here. So that is working fine, but now we need to go ahead and get to our actual codes. So for that, we're going to say enter dot mouse button one click connect function. We're going to say holder dot box frame dot text box dot text editable, which, as you see right here, determines whether the user can change the text or not. And this is going to be equal to false. We don't want them to be able to change the text when they press enter, because we're going to be changing the placeholder text for them. Or not the placeholder text, the actual text. After that, we're going to say local code text is going to be equal to submit code invoke server. This is how we invoke the remote function, which is similar to firing a remote event, but in this case it's simply invoking the server. And we're going to pass the holder.boxframe.textbox.text in there as a parameter that we're going to be using in our other script. And we're simply going to say holder.boxframe.textbox.text will be equal to our code text, because how the remote function works is we're going to invoke the server. On the server, we're going to do some changes, do some checking. We're going to do some scripting overall. And then it's going to return that remote function back over here to the client, where we're going to continue on with our function. And so since we can return things on the server, we just can change the text over here, which is going to ultimately determine what our text will say. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. After that, we just want to wait a period of seconds. This can be 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, however long you want the message to be. Now we're going to change our holder.boxframe.textbox.text, and this is just going to be equal to quotation marks, because this will reset the text inside of it. And then holder.boxframe.textbox.text editable will be equal to true. So basically, whenever our enter button gets clicked, it's going to make sure that we can't change the text inside of our text box anymore. It's going to fire to the server. Once we code all the stuff on the server, it's going to return whatever we did back to the client, where we're going to set the text of our text box to whatever we passed back to the client. After a period of wait time right here, it's going to reset our text and then make it so that we can go ahead and type again, so we can type in new codes. This is all that we need to do on the client. So let's go ahead and close off our local script right here. And we can close off our starter GUI as well, and replicate storage while we're at it. Now we need to go over to server script service, hover over it, click on the plus icon, and insert a script. Now at the top of this script, I'm just going to start off with the same services comment as earlier to keep our code organized. And we're going to need a few of the same variables from earlier as well. This will be local player will be players will be equal to game get service players, and we're going to need the same replicated storage, which will be equal to game get service replicated storage. Now, a unique service that we're going to need is called data store service. I haven't talked a lot on this service yet, but I'm going to be releasing a tutorial on it soon. But data store service is simply a way of saving data and accessing data that we can use for our player. So we're going to need to get our data store service, so that way we can go ahead and save the codes that we use, that way the player can't join back and redeem them again. So this is going to be equal to game get service data store service, and that's all we need for our services. So let's go ahead and create another comment for our variables instead this time. We're going to have our local submit code variable, which is going to be equal to replicated storage.submit code. That's our remote function right there. We're also going to need our data store from our data store service, and this is going to be equal to data store service get data store. And then here's where we need to name our data store with a string. For me, I'm just going to name this testing, or you can name it test data store. It doesn't really matter what we name it. However, while we're still developing, it's important that you give it sort of a test name. That way, once you release your game, you can simply change this over to game or world or real, whatever you want to call your actual data store for the game, because that's going to be all the data for players, and then this is simply going to be your testing data that you use to test new updates, test all sorts of stuff. Anyways, now we need to create a codes list, and this is the fun part. So we're going to say that this is equal to a pair of braces right here, or squiggly brackets, and we can press enter inside of them, and here's where we get to create our codes. So what we're going to do is we're going to put square brackets right here with quotation marks inside of them, and we're going to create codes. So for me, I'm going to create code 1, and you can once again name these whatever you want to. You can share them with people, or you can't share them with people, whatever you want to do. I'm going to personally set this equal to 200. This is going to be the value that we have to reward the players with. So this will be 200 coins in my scenario. You can also create, I guess, codes after certain people if you want to, like if a YouTuber plays your game, or if you want your very own code, you can put your own avatar name in there. So code Rusty Silly Band is going to be equal to 150 coins. And keep in mind, you can have as many codes as you would like to. Anyways, let's go down a few lines right here, and I'm going to declare our functions comment right here. Gonna scroll down a bit so you guys can see it easier. So now we need to create a function for whenever our players get added to the game. So I'm going to say players.playerAdded. We're going to connect a function with the player as the parameter. We're going to say local leader stats will be equal to instance.new folder inside these quotation marks. Leader stats.name is going to be equal to quotation marks leader stats, all lowercase. And then leader stats.parent is going to be equal to player. Now leader stats, if you don't know, it's simply a folder that we put inside of a player, and it pretty much creates a little leaderboard in the top right of their screen, which will display their stats or their values that we put inside of leader stats. So for me, I'm going to create a coins value, and this is going to be equal to instance.new int value. And then coins.name is going to be equal to coins with a capital C this time if you'd like to. And then coins.parent will be equal to leader stats. That's all we need to do for this players.playerAdded function. So let's drop down a few lines. We're going to say submit code dot on server invoke will be equal to a function with parentheses, and we're going to take player as the parameter and also the code that the player is passing to us, which, if you don't remember, was the text inside of that text box. After that, we're going to check if our codes list square brackets code, which is going to check if our code is actually part of our codes list, and this does not equal to nil, then, which means that if it actually exists. Then we're going to continue on, and we're going to say if data store get async code equals to nil, then, so if our data store does not pick up the data for this code, so if the player hasn't redeemed it yet basically, then we're going to say data store set async code comma true. This is simply going to save the data for our code. Then we're going to say player.leaderstats dot coins dot value plus equals codes list square brackets code, which is going to add the coins value of our code up here, which in this case is 150 or 200, and this is going to give it to the player. Then if all those things happen, we're going to return valid code just like this. Let's drop down one end right here, and we're going to return already redeemed. This will just determine whether or not the code was already redeemed or not. And then dropping down one more end, we're going to return incorrect code. Now the reason why we return all these different strings right here is simply because whenever we invoke the server on the client, it's going to come over here and it's going to do all this stuff right here, but then it's going to return back to the client from the server. So we want to take a few values with it, which in this case are these strings. So if it gets to this part right here, it's going to return the valid code string. If it only gets to this part, it's going to return the already redeemed string. And if it gets to this part, it's going to return the incorrect code string. So this is actually everything that we need for our code. But before we actually go ahead and play our game, we need to make sure that we save our game to Roblox so that we can access the data store. So let's click on the home tab right here. Click on game settings, which is this little gear icon on the right here. And then we need to click on save to Roblox. From there, you need to give it a name for your game, which for me, I'm going to rename to Codes Tutorial, and then click on save. And then once we're back here, we can just go back to our game settings button on the right, and then go over to security and then enable Studio access to API services, which will enable Studio access to game services such as data stores, which is perfect, and that's what we want. So let's click on save and then click on play, and we can actually test out our script. So first off, you'll notice that our leader stats are working because we have our coins value up here. It's keeping track of that. So let's go ahead and try and type in our first code, which was code 1. Now when we press enter, it should say valid code and it should reward us with 200 coins. Let's click on enter. You'll see valid code and 200 coins right there. After 3 seconds, it's going to go away. Now what happens if we try and type in code 1 again? It's going to say already redeemed because we have already redeemed that code. And then if we type in something like code 2, which simply isn't a code, it's going to say incorrect code. Let's try and type in Rusty Silly Band for that code. Press enter, valid code, and it gave us that 150 coins, which is perfect. Let's go ahead and test out the data store to make sure that works. So we're going to leave and then click on play again. So inside of here, let's go ahead and test out code 1. Press on enter. You'll see already redeemed because we have already redeemed that code in the past. So with that, we know that the code data store is working perfectly and our codes cannot be redeemed once they already have been. So anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial. If it helped you a lot, please make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below. Anyways, I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. God bless.